Hello and welcome to this edition of Grain Farmers of Ontario GrainTALK webinar. For this webinar, I am really pleased to have a group of farmers to share about cover crops, the how, the why, and their benefits and challenges. I'm Laura Ferrier with Grain Farmers of Ontario, and joining me today, I have Paige Allen with the Ontario Soil Network, and along with Soil Network participants, Larry Dyck, Adam Ireland, and Andy Van Niekerk. I'm guessing that between these farmers, we probably have, what do you think, guys, 30 plus years of cover cropping experience between the three of you to share, which is really amazing. And I'm so excited to hear what you have to share with us today. To start the webinar off, I'm going to hand it over to Paige, who is going to share a very brief intro on the Ontario Soil Network. Thanks, Paige, for joining us.
Thanks so much, Laura, for having us this morning. My name is Paige Allen. I'm the program coordinator with the Ontario Soil Network. We're really excited to be here to collaborate with GFO and discuss cover crops this morning. So a bit of context, the Ontario Soil Network is a farmer-led network focused on improving Ontario's soils by connecting and supporting farmers across the province with training, access to research, and networking opportunities. Farmers can tap into OSN's resources and bring them back into their own communities in a way to support lasting adoption, and environmentally and sustainably, financially sustainably viable agricultural practices as well. So the OSN operates from a learner-centered approach, which allows all of our members to determine their own interests, and we work to provide relevant resources and connections to assist them in achieving their goals. By building on these personal goals and connections, participants develop the skills needed to engage and support others within their own communities. We know the important value of soil health, and it's something that is of top of mind for most of us. However, finding ways of maintaining and improving soils is not always an easy task, so why do it alone? And that is our goal at the OSN, to continue to bring together all kinds of producers from different sectors across Ontario to network and support one another through sharing resources and sharing knowledge. We have three kind of flagship offerings at the OSN. Our Network Challenge is our one-year intake program, which is a 6-week course offering different topics such as continuous learning, conducting research, effective communication, and storytelling strategies. And as a member of the OSN, you are able to access this huge network of other producers who can help you troubleshoot your challenges, share in your successes, and brainstorm how to tackle big problems. We also have a podcast, the Soil Network, which shares and features real-world stories and lessons learned from the field. And we would always encourage everyone to come and join us for events. So if you are interested in getting involved, you can stay up to date by signing up to our mailing list on our website. You can follow us on Twitter as well. We'd love to see you out at events this summer, so make sure to keep an eye out on our website. We'll be announcing events within the next couple of months. And you can always listen to our podcast as well. If you're interested in joining the network, our Network Challenge cohort for 2026 opens October 2025. If you're interested in applying, make sure to check our website and our Twitter for more information as well. And here are all of our socials. You can follow along. We'd love to have you part of the network. Thanks so much, Laura.
Amazing. Thanks, Paige. And Grain Farmers of Ontario is very happy to be able to support the OSN program over the past number of years and working with you to share some really great stories. So now I'm going to have each of our growers who are joining us today just give a really brief introduction. Adam, if you're able to just kick us off, that would be great.
Yeah, certainly. Thanks, Laura. So my name's Adam Ireland. Farm in the south end of Bruce County and a little bit in Huron County as well. Grew up on a dairy farm, and dairying wasn't really in my heart. So I worked off the farm for a bunch of years, and as things sort of grew, we got to a point where we were able to split off a cash cropping operation. So I grow corn, wheat, soybeans, edible beans, and then covers, as well as alfalfa, because I'm still growing all the feed for the dairy operation. But we do try and run sort of separately as best we can. So with that, we've been cover cropping forever with alfalfa, one of the greatest cover crops. But as far as a more focused effort, probably been maybe 15 years or so that we've been working on cover crops, starting very easy with something after wheat, oats and that. And but I will have to say that one of the advantages that I do have being connected to a dairy farm is we do use the covers for feed, and so that there's another economic reason to be using them. So that's a brief introduction of what we're up to.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Adam, for sharing that. Larry, I'll pass it on to you.
Thanks very much. My name is Larry Dyck. I farm together with my son and our wives in Niagara. We are on the wonderful heavy clay soils of Haldeman, Niagara, and that's just what we're handed. And so the we've been working with cover crops for a long time with red clover, with oilseed radish following wheat, but we really jumped into it hard in 2016, going multi-species, looking at plant green and no-till, and all of that came as a result of a real frustration with our soils. Our crop rotations, it's not a rotation, our crops include corn, soys, wheat. We have been edible beans, we've backed off that for now. We've got sunflowers in the mix, and we're trying to get no-till winter canola going, and then also trying to keep the soil covered and living roots in the soil as much of the year as we can with covers.
Amazing. Very cool. Thanks for joining us today. And Andy, if you'd share with us.
Yes, thanks, Laura. I live and farm in Stayner, Ontario, just south of Stayner, actually, in Simcoe County. And we've a relatively small farm compared to a lot of Larry's and Adam's. But we have a hog finishing barn on there, which keeps our fertilizer truck off the farm. And so that's where the bulk of my fertility comes from. I'm a certified crop advisor, and I kind of use my farm as a guide to advising my customers. So I do a lot of fooling around on my farm, I guess, if I can use that expression. When I started cover cropping, my big aha moment was when we were doing an experiment with my colleague Dr. Hume. We had testing out a phosphorus solubilizing bacteria, and we specifically chose a very low phosphorus concentration farm. And we had, I won't go through all the treatments, but what struck me was the control, which was nothing, had yielded 190 bushels, and I thought, well, this doesn't add up, because it shouldn't have delivered that. So then that's when I started studying a lot of more about the analysis of the soil. And of course, a lot of you folks know that the soil fertility triangle is nutrients, the chemistry, the physical, and the biological side, that triangle. And so that's when my aha moment was that there's more to the soil than just chemistry analysis. And so that's when I started down my cover cropping road and soil health knowledge seeking journey, I guess, and if I could use that expression. So that's my story. That's my start, I guess. So that was probably 15 years ago, I guess. So yeah.
That's awesome. And there's I'm sure, learning every year that you're working with cover crops and tweaking and changing, and that's awesome. So
absolutely.
So since you're a CCA, Andy, I'm going to pose this first question to you to start with, since you're working with maybe some other farmers who are looking at starting their cover crop journey, and then I'll let the other two jump in after you've responded. But what considerations should farmers take before starting with cover crops?
I think probably know your why. Like, why are you doing it? What's your goal in just even starting down that road? Just as an example, and also review your goals. Like a really simple one is, how are you going to terminate the cover crop when you? So you should know that answer before you even plant it, in my opinion. And what are you trying to accomplish? Weed control, soil health, or even logistics of spreading manure on your ground. So I think that's know your why is the most important thing, in my opinion.
Larry, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I've thought a lot about this. Initially, my first response was, there's a lot of people telling us why cover crops don't work. But even beyond that, our default as North American farmers is tillage. And if something doesn't work, we let it go and go back to tillage. If no-till doesn't work, we go, if tillage doesn't work, we keep tilling. Like, then we buy a different tool. It's obviously not tillage's fault. But I jumped into cover crops. You know, Adam talks about having alfalfa and the opportunity to use the forages in rotation. I've been looking for a lot of years at how to actively include forages in a rotation without having to get four-footed forage consumers on the farm. And our geography, our logistics, lots of things don't work. I shouldn't say don't work. Wouldn't work as easily for that. You should never say can't. So in 2016, when we heard about incorporating forages and other cover crops into an active row crop rotation routinely and planting into them and all that stuff, that really grabbed me. And so, yeah, I would agree with Andy on knowing the why. My push into it came out of a sheer frustration with our soil and realizing that I wasn't happy with our default tillage, that I wanted to move away from that.
Do you have any insight to share? Or you?
I guess I will just share one thing. I don't disagree with either of the other two, only to say that a lot of the people who, when we started 15 and 20 years ago, we were very simplified in what our goals and our plans were, because we didn't know what we didn't know. And so for us, it was simply erosion, tillage. We've got a lot of hills here and the lighter ground. It was a very simple reason why we started. But I didn't have a lot of goals. I was just like, read a little bit of buzz on cover crops and decided to jump in. And I think a lot of the people of that mindset did that, years ago. But if they didn't have success like Larry's talking about, I would encourage to try again. It's every year is different. We've had some train wrecks, and maybe if you jumped in on a train wreck year, you're gun shy. But I think the thing to think about is pick a very simple goal to start with, and start with a small amount of acres. If you're about train wreck, we can get a little crazy with plants.
Great, thank you for sharing that. Our next question, I'm going to hand first off to Larry, just because I think, Larry, you've got some more challenging soil than the other two who are maybe on the call in some way, shape, and form. So, Larry, how do you establish a good cover crop stand?
For me, at this point, it's getting it into the ground somehow, drilling it. All of our covers go in drilled. We've tried the broadcasting route and didn't have as good success. But even then, sometimes we have wrecks. 2 years ago, 2023, August was really wet for us, and we were really struggling to get covers planted behind wheat. And my wife and I were heading off on holidays right after Labor Day. So we're out of August now, and we still don't have a lot of our covers planted. And we saw a window of 1 or 2 days coming, and I said to Ben, my son, I said, focus in on that, even though the soil isn't quite ready, because it was supposed to get quite wet again. And so he did, and he pushed hard in those couple days to get everything planted. And what was really interesting, the one particular day, what he planted before supper time, so 6 p.m., kind of germinated. But he had to come home, reload, and go out and finish. And he planted till midnight. And by 2 a.m. it was raining, and we got 2 inches the next day. What he planted after supper, not even the oats germinated, nothing. Just because our soil was damp, and then we get heavy water on it. We have that experience. So, drilling isn't a guarantee. But we do know that if we can get it into the soil, we're way farther ahead.
A great point. It's in the soil is your first starting point. So that's good. Andy and Adam, any comments?
I would say I agree. Drilling is the best way. It's better germination and quicker establishment. And I think the quicker you can get your cover crop competitive against weeds, I think that's the better thing. And although it can be difficult after corn harvest, and if you get like Larry said, if it gets damp, you have to be careful not to do any compaction damage. And in that case, even this winter, I waited until we had a small frost on it. So I planted rye. I haven't looked at it. It's been covered ever since. Seems the amount of snow we've had this year. But and I'm not concerned about it. It'll come up it'll come up and give a reasonable cover crop anyways. So yeah. How about you, Adam?
Yeah, I guess I would say that one discussion I had early on with an individual who'd been in the game a little bit longer was to treat cover crops like a cash crop and put the effort into establishment. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it has to go through a drill or it has to be complicated, but it needs to be methodical. You need to think about it the same way you would planting corn or any other crop. You have to put some thought into how it's going to be done. The simple way can work, but the right conditions have to be lined up for broadcast into standing corn to work. It's just
Agreed.
As long as you consider what's coming and what you're working with, then that's there's lots of different ways to make it work.
If I could jump back in, Andy, I find it interesting that you can plant after corn harvest. For us to plant cereal rye late into damp soils, the stuff won't grow. And so we've tooled up to interseed into the corn when it's at 4 or 5 leaves, but we're still incorporating the seed into the soil with a rake.
Yeah. And I would agree that's the best way. I just haven't got my tool for that type of thing. And I think when I was at your place there, I think that's a better way to get established into corn for sure.
But there's lots.
I've heard of people bulk spreading with a helicopter into corns, and if you've got biologically active soil, all the worms take the seed, and a customer of mine did that, and it really didn't establish at all. It was a waste of seed. Yeah.
That's an interesting comment, and we'll come back to that in a couple more questions on aerial application. Adam, since I know you've got that livestock component, so it might be slightly different than those who are strictly grain crop focused. But how do you manage your cover crop throughout the year, and then as the year is coming to a close and trying to terminate that?
Well, what we'll do is take a look at what our future needs are going to be, what the soil test looks like in that field, and if it is going to need some phosphorus, I'll fertilize that crop. I'll try and do a blend when we're putting it into the ground, and treat it again, back to treating it like a cash crop. You touched on the livestock component. If at all possible, we will put manure on top of a growing cover crop. We've been trying very, very hard to not do do as little as we can, and especially with manure, that was one of my biggest holdups when we got into no-till, was what to do with the manure. And I've learned over the years that if we can apply to a living cover crop, the smell is much lower, and I think we are capturing a good number of those nutrients. There's still going to be some nitrogen that we lose. But I think if we can put that on a living cover, we're in pretty good shape, and it certainly does really gives that cover crop a boost and gets it going quite well. So
amazing. Larry or Andy, any weigh in on that?
And I would agree with Adam on that. And for me, it's a way to manage my manure. For me, it's always been an integrated approach, the systems approach for cover crops. I've recently always been putting manure on my cover crops. Probably October, I think last year was November 15th is when the fellows finally got here to spread. But yeah, I'm not sure how much you lose compared to overwinter loss. Anyways, I think I think that's debatable about how much you actually lose by putting it compared to incorporating it. That's my take on it. How about you, Larry?
For us, we don't have any livestock anymore, used to. So I am planting green. If I terminate the cover crop early, which I realize many of our Ontario advisors suggest is the way to do it, I can lay down a mulch mat and my ground will not dry out. Whereas, and one of my biggest concerns when we ventured into this was how were we going to plant into wheat stubble with a cover crop in it? And we've had some really wet springs since we started this 9 years ago, and I have not found that to be an issue for us the way I expected it. So we plant green, we terminate after, and carry on. Another thing we do, I'm not trying to grow biomass for forage the way Adam is, and so I've really found that in terms of seeding rates, less is more. I don't need a huge seeding rate. I don't have to be able to stand in the field and not see the ground. I want to see the ground. So on a multi-species, we're planting, 20 pounds. Now, I realize I should be looking at seed count because that 20 pounds includes a lot of small forage seeds. So are we at the 2 million seed mark? I haven't taken the time to make the count, but less is more. And then we terminate after planting.
Thank you. I think you've also touched on this question a little bit in prior comments. Larry, you're talking about interseeding through corn at that kind of 5-leaf V5 stage, I think you kind of said. So I'm assuming you're using some precision ag tools for GPS to plant into row. But is there anything else that you're utilizing for precision ag in that cover crop establishment, management, et cetera, going through the season?
Other than GPS, no. A lot of my equipment is set up for variable rate. We haven't gone down that route yet. But no, not other than the GPS, no.
And you're, Adam, using anything else other than GPS?
My farm's really, I don't have a lot of, it's pretty small, so I can't justify a lot of really expensive precision ag tools. Certainly everybody's got guidance, light bars and whatnot, but that's kind of what I use, but that's it for me. How about you, Adam?
Yeah, the same here. Actually, until I looked at this question at first, I didn't even really think about variable rate on my cover crop establishment, and I had to wrap my head around that, because generally, if we're in the fields that are further from the barn that we're not doing for forage production, we're at a fairly low seeding rate, and I'd be maybe nervous to cut that back any significance. So I think, as much as I said earlier, we treat it like a cash crop. There's a lot of other things where we're keeping it pretty simple, and as far as the technology goes, that would be one of them. We're just auto steer to try and get in between the rows if we're going into corn, or go across the rows. Actually, a lot of in the wide open falls that we've had this last few years, my drill becomes my tillage tool to just process those corn stalks a little bit. So we're just trying to get the right angle to chop things up a little bit while we're putting the cereal rye down.
Yeah, I've had a customer who actually variable rates cover crop and the seeding rate on the drier knolls, a heavier population, and then where there's more moisture in the valleys, a less pot, just for cost control. But really, I mean, cereal rye is not real expensive anyway, so it's but yeah, some of the other high priced components of a species mix might be more expensive, but that's probably what they're doing there.
Sense, and that's interesting that they are considering that in some situations as well. I also think this question talking on it's important to get the seed in the ground and seed to soil contact, but are there any of you who've entertained using drones or other aerial application for cover crops? And if you have, has there been success?
Certainly entertained the idea. not just for cover crops. Yeah, I'm really taken by this idea of broadcasting wheat into soybeans or into our sunflowers. And yet I know that 30 years ago, there was a lot of guys broadcasting wheat for a while with airplanes, and then that died right out. Will we get it figured out? I mean, a drone can give us much more accurate seeding into tight corners where an airplane can't, but we still can't get away from the slugs and some of those things. In terms of our mixed species cover crops, before we went to the fully to where we have our interseeder now, the first year we did broadcast over standing corn. One year we had really good success, and the next year was a complete train wreck. And so we decided we needed to get it in the ground. And so that's where we are right now. But always looking, because I love the idea of a drone, but will it work consistently?
That's where I look at it, Larry. Is that a drone would give me a little more control over that consistency, looking at that forecast and hoping to do an application, a few days before rain, because that's where all the train wrecks up here have happened, is where you get everything together and you get the seed broadcast out into standing corn and that stays dry for 2 or 3 weeks. And then it's just a waste of time. So I don't have a drone. That's where I think it would real fit. I'm very intrigued, but haven't made the investment yet.
Me too. Intrigued.
My sentiments are exactly the same as Adam's. It looks intriguing, but some of the reports that I've heard on like I said, on aerial application of cereal rye to corn has not been real successful. So.
Totally understandable, and I think you've all mentioned that there's some concerns or challenges that you still need to work around. One thing, just as a grain farmer's agronomist, we caution spreading any treated seed over top of a crop that is going to be harvested, just to make sure that treated seed doesn't end up in the grain channel. But I can also see that there's some very cool other things that can be done, maybe with seed that isn't treated, so that's not a concern. So going forward, and I'm going to toss this one to Andy to start us off with. What are your sources of information that you, Andy, might be using, or some of your customers who you're working with, for cover crop related decisions?
Yeah. So and I always lean on my OSN colleagues for sure. I mean, that's a great resource. They're, don't be afraid to do that. Personal experiences is probably your best guide. Never discredit the value of making mistakes, and so as long as your mistakes are, like, I always tell my customers to really push something on a small part of your land. If it's 5 acres, really push it. Have a big mistake on something like that, and you always learn from the extremes in that type of thing. But at least on 5 acres or whatever the number is, you're not going to break the bank on that sort of thing, but you still get that learning experience for sure. So that's kind of so that's the OSN is probably my main source of good information right now, and the Ontario Soil Crop Improvement Association has a lot of good items in there as well. So yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Andy. The Soil and Crop Association in the early years was absolutely tremendous information. I would say that was probably where the best spot to get some information was Ontario Soil and Crop. In later years, the Soil Network is phenomenal. Those of us who've been through the program are all invited to be part of a group chat, and it's a great spot to throw ideas out and get a little bit of feedback. From those ideas. So peers, agronomists, and personal experience. A few years ago, I mean, a lot of talk about 60-inch corn, and I had a planter that could do twin row 60-inch corn, and I thought it was a ridiculous idea, but I still went and planted my 5 acres of 60-inch corn, and we broadcast some covers into it in July, and actually as far as cover establishment, it was phenomenal. It was great, but I still think it's a ridiculous idea. And I think and sort of to reiterate, I think if you had a spot, if you were grazing those covers,
Yeah,
there's always a reason that makes it work. And for us, it was just there was a yield drag on that 60-inch corn, and maybe if we get past that for whatever reason. So not to throw shade on anyone who's doing 60-inch corn, there's reasons for it, and I'm just saying that for my operation, you know, we're not adopting that.
I think grazing cattle, that's a beautiful place to do that sort of thing. You get 2 crops in the year from that, in my opinion. Yeah.
Laura, I'll pursue anyone who will talk to me, and the wonderful world of Twitter, although it's diminishing, but we have access to information globally, and that's really cool. If I could just back up your comment about treated seed, I apologize that I didn't clarify. That is critical. That's absolutely critical. But going further, like I haven't planted treated wheat seed or soybean seed on my farm in 8 years, other than if I'm purchasing seed. My bin run is cleaned. So, I mean, we clean it, we handle it as a good seed crop, and then we plant it untreated. So, but if we're going to broadcast, it has to be untreated. It simply has to be. We cannot.
I appreciate you clarifying. It was just one of my clarifications because we've had challenges in the past. But,
thank you for picking up on that. I apologize.
No apologies required. That's great. And I just the wealth of information on this computer screen right now is astounding me with cover crops, and it's great to hear all these ingenious ways and thoughts and ways to problem solve, which is great. One other thing that I was going to ask is, do any of you ever utilize the Midwest cover crop tool, maybe when you were starting out your journey, or if you're familiar with it? I know Grain Farmers of Ontario, we a lot of our research ends up, if we're supporting the research, it ends up in this Midwest cover crops tool. So and you may or may not have referenced it, and I realize the OSN group is a very wealth of knowledge that you can pull from too, but that's also going forward another resource that you can look into if you're ever interested. So
definitely have referenced it.
There you go. So I guess I don't know, somebody can jump in here and talk about one challenge that has occurred throughout your cover crop trials and tribulations, maybe, and how you solved it, and if there was some main challenge that you've been dealing with, and what was that aha golden moment that helped you solve that problem.
I can go first if you want, Laura. Oh, sorry. Sure. Go ahead, Larry.
Go ahead, Adam. You're going.
Okay.
So I would say the best would take this one, so that's good.
The biggest challenge that we've seen over the years is moisture management. Because cereal rye, there's a significant number of acres that are planted at a high rate to be taken as a forage. In the spring, if we have a dry spring, that cereal rye just sucks so much moisture out of the ground. And I've had it where the cash crop that goes in after the cereal rye, which usually is edible beans, where it's delayed that crop. But on a really bad year, we've even had to replant because there was just nothing there to germinate the crop coming afterwards. And the flip side also is in a really, really wet year where you can't get into terminate. And on those years, and I'm talking about different acres, because we have acres that aren't close enough to be used for forage. So in that case, those acres are managed differently. And so on those years where it's been very wet, that's where we really got into planting green, because we didn't have the option to terminate. So we just went in there and planted, and then got in and sprayed it off as soon as we could, not make a mess. And so I guess when it comes to moisture management, there's ways that things can be managed. If things look really dry, I'll go in and terminate early, just to try and get that crop to stop pulling moisture out of the ground. And the flip side is we can, let it grow. If it's a really wet year, even if we could terminate, sometimes I'll leave it grow so that maybe can dry the ground up, and certainly gives a very firm ground and holds that planting equipment very well. If we can get in there when it's maybe a little bit too wet everywhere else, we can get in on some of those acres that have a good cover crop growing on them, because that cover crop just loosens up the soil, and it just makes a beautiful planting condition.
Yeah, and that's really a springtime phenomenon, Adam. I don't know whether you'd worry about that too much in the fall, about whether you terminate it then, but I think you're right. You have to manage the moisture in the springtime for sure. One of the things that I've noticed on mine cover crops was this past particular year was I noticed a lot of leaf diseases on. There's a lot of volunteer wheat in my cover crop, and we had some oats planted as well as some other species in there. Now, but I did notice that there was a lot of leaf diseases coming in the volunteer wheat and the oats, and rust. Oats is pretty susceptible to rust anyways, but it was interesting. We spread manure on, just a light coating of 3,000 gallons, and within a week and a half it was all gone. All the leaf diseases were gone. So I'm really rethinking my strategy of not fertilizing my cover crops. It made me think about that sort of thing. Now, in this particular case, it was fine because it bounced back and everything was okay. But I like Adam there. If you've got a mentioned earlier that it's a good strategy to apply your phosphorus on if you've got a low phos farm, to really get that going at that time, and you get a little bit of boost from your to your cover crops. And yeah, anytime you can get more growth on top, you're getting more growth underneath the soil as well, and that's really what you want, is more root mass, more root rhizosphere to produce glomulants, and that's really what starting to make your soil nice cottage cheese type of soil is the amount of root mass that you get in there. So yeah, so that's kind of my experience.
One of our biggest challenges, I mean, we've been no-tilling beans and wheat for a lot of years, and as we moved into covers, it meant no-tilling corn, which I had some negative experience with back in the 80s. And so we had to learn that we needed to move our corn planting deep, which meant we had to change planters to a planter that would punch into our hard soils and get it deep enough. So, but those were things we simply had to walk our way through. But that's how we dealt with it, Laura, was by changing planters till we got one that would push it in on our hard soils.
Seems like you try and try again, and eventually that solution will come to you, or you'll find it, which is amazing. Now, looking at Plant Green, I realize not all of you might be doing Plant Green. Maybe you are, like Adam said, when things go a little sideways and you're into Plant Green all of a sudden in the spring. But when you're looking at what are some considerations, how much biomass do you want or not want when you're trying to manage it, and how are you managing that top biomass to when you're planting in general, and what are those kind of red flags to watch out for? I think, Larry, I'll talk. Maybe you can start with this one if that's okay.
It's interesting. My soils are not like Adam's or Andy's. For us, usually our challenge is getting rid of moisture in the springtime. And so I'm not in a situation where I have to be concerned about the cover pulling too much. Now, I'm also on, a 3-day soil, one day too wet, one day just right, next day too dry. And we ran into that with our Plant Green as well. And that too impacted our choice of planter, because when the soil got too hard, some of our earlier planters couldn't handle it. So how much biomass? I'll take whatever, but this is my context. If I can't see the toolbar, I'm fine. If I can see the toolbar, I'm still fine. I really don't mind. One thing we did do on the corn planter, probably the second year into it, was we put crimp rollers on the planter. And we're not terminating with a crimp roller, but we're rolling it down so that we can run the spray boom at the 16 to 18 inches. Because the first year we did this, I was carrying my boom at 4 feet right after we planted, and I hit a vineyard with Aragon right beside me. So we're still good neighbors. We still talk. It didn't do long-term damage, but that really scared me. I mean, I know I can't use the hormonals, and I know all that, but that Aragon did that damage. So by running the crimp rollers, we can run our spray booms down at the height they need to. Now, my air seeders, I don't have crimp rollers on there, but I find we have enough openers that they smash the crop down, and we can do the same thing by, you know, the air seeder equipment itself simply smashes the cover crop down. So biomass, yes or no? I love planting into a heavy biomass. One thing we did realize when we have a really active cover crop is that the top ½ inch to 3/4 of an inch of the soil won't close. The closing wheels cannot get there because they're rolling on this heavy mat. And so but that's what we found by going deep, like past 2.5 inches, we've still got 2 inches of crumbly soil that has fallen in just from the nature of the planter going through. And so then that top ½ to 3/4 of an inch open, it's not a wet open. It's simply being held open by the stitching of all the roots. And it has not been a problem since we've figured out how to go deep. But the first year we had a train wreck for drought and a lot of things, but also significant planter issues.
Yeah, I would concur with Larry on that. Deeper is, you got to get used to planting your crop deeper, particularly corn will, and it will handle it. And you have to choose. Pardon?
Not on soys, because
No, you have to actually, you can though, but to choose a seed that has a long hypocotyl, because there are differences in varieties in that regard. Yeah. So, but yeah, so I plant green all the time. That's my standard practice, and I've toyed with an organic field, and I've planted in the middle of like the late or early June with some success, but on my conventional soils, I'll always plant when the soil is ready, not when the cover crop is ready to crimp. You know, I don't rely on that cover crop for my weed control, but always plant when the soil is ready.
Yeah.
That's and if it's earlier, that's okay too. I find that the cover crop will mitigate a green cover crop will mitigate some frost issues there, because there's still moisture in there. So
the only thing I'll add to the conversation is if you're on the fence and it's a wet year, you're not sure whether you're going to plant green or not. Do not make the decision a week before planting that you're going to go out and terminate the cover crop pen. There is a window in there where you're better to just stay out of the field, let it keep growing. If you can get in, 3 weeks before and terminate the crop, great. But there is that critical window, and we've seen that as the cover crop's dying off. It just for whatever reason, lots of things going on there, but the seed that your plant does not germinate well.
That's a real good point, Adam, and I'm glad you clarified that. That's a real good point. Your double disc openers will go through brown crispy roots, and they'll go through a green crispy roots, but they won't go through an in-between root that's kind of bending all the time. That's a good point.
I just wanted to say I've never a tall green cover crop, regardless of the biomass, the planters cut it. It goes through like butter. We have no hairpinning issues on a dying stringy plant. yeah, then you got hairpinning and trash issues and all kinds of things. But on a big, tall cover crop, it is no problem for the planter discs to cut it.
Really interesting and great to note, and something that I haven't seen a lot of plant green in I've never been in the field as something's being planted, and that's just a really great just to acknowledge that and to know that that's something to be aware of as people are looking into planting green. That's great. So my next question, I'll start off with Andy, and I'm going to kind of combine two of the questions. But first off, do you run any trials on farm for cover crops? And you might say every year is a trial, and it's something new being learned every year, and we're tweaking and changing. And then also, as if you are looking at some trials or looking at what works, what doesn't work, what are you measuring, and how do you measure success as well? Like, what is that yes, this worked, and I'm going to do this again next year?
Yeah, I have run some cover crop trials there, really more for demonstration than I haven't really tried. I haven't really got results on trying to get the results on those is very clumsy and very indecisive in my opinion. You can't, but I think the most important thing, what I was trying to demonstrate to field day customers there was just get a cover crop planted. And this is what they all look like, if I can use a, my measure of success really is if I don't have a shovel, it's looking for worm middens. The number of earthworms in the soil is my measure of success. And the organic matter percentage, like the percent organic matter, trying to improve that so that to hold more water. And I think the ability of your soil to withstand droughts in those extreme weather situations, I think drought and also rain. I mean, we had 3 inches of rain in about an hour one year, and the neighbor's field kind of washed over onto mine, and we have a Hickenbottom there, but it just didn't take it all in, and so it came across my farm there because it wasn't soaking in the neighbors. And I don't want to discredit my neighbor too much, but I said, gee, I better look around, and so I walked my field after that, and where there was normally in years past there was flooding and surface water movement, there was nothing there because the structure of the soil, it took all the water that was there. The drainage channels were there that were working, and the structure of the soil was much better than it was in years past. So that's kind of my measure of my assessment of that. I'm sure Larry has something to comment about that.
We run lots of trials. The cover crop thing, I guess I'm getting enough experience that we could begin to play with. I plant mixed species wherever I can, just because my soils are variable. So something's going to grow somewhere. That's the reason I like the mixed species. Also, because if I've got oats out there and they're in a mixed species, I don't care if they go to head. There's not that many oats. My trials much more surround fertility, especially nitrogen. I'm really intrigued by Laura Van Eerd's ongoing work around legacy N, and what can we do with that? I'm involved in living labs and some of those things, looking at stabilizers. We've run some biologicals with not great success. So just looking at all of that, how do we define success? It's really simple. We're still here farming, and we put our whole farm into this, so we're still here. One other measure, Mel Loima said on an OSN challenge a number of years ago, said reduce your goal statement to 6 words. And mine was, can cover crop roots replace tillage? And I would say yes.
That's a great statement there, Larry. Appreciate that.
It's a question. It's not a statement. It's a question.
Yeah, no, well,
Still
it
learning.
is, but
Adam.
Yeah, as far as trials, yeah, every year is a different trial. I think you hit the nail on the head there, Laura. I don't do as many planned, really well thought out trials. There'll be a spot where we ran out of cover crop, and so we've got a no cover crop trial. We have those places in the field, and what I'll do is I'll follow that through and look at the yield maps and compare at the end to see where we were. So as far as really scientific rigor, no. But we do try and either both visually and follow through on yield with everything that we're doing. Even if it's not rigorous, it's still a data point that we can use on our farm. We may not share it amongst everyone, but if it's not rigorous, I don't feel it should be shared. But it's still something that we use ourselves. And then the other thing is the University of Guelph has the Soil Health Assessment and Plan program, SHAP, and we've had them out testing our fields. So what that is it's supposed to give you a score of the soil health on your farm. There's a whole lot of different components to it. I don't have it in front of me. It's really not something I don't think for this this forum to really get into detail. But I will say I don't understand it at this point. There's a lot to learn on it, and there's the fields that we've had through the rating on them. I thought was lower than it should be based on the long-term practices on the fields. So I guess that tells me I've got room to grow and room to better understand what's going on with that SHAP program. So bottom line for me is you never stop learning in this industry. There's a lot of opportunities.
Real good point.
To jump in on the SHAP comment, I had a conversation with Ryan Carlo a year ago, and he called me the same. There were a couple of us down in our neck of the woods on the SHAP program, and it's a great program. But he said our soils were not reflecting the raw data. He said was excellent, but the way they were pulling the numbers together was not giving us very high ratings. And I said, well, maybe that's, this all is new to us, and maybe we aren't interpreting our numbers entirely correctly yet. And he agreed with that. And the other part of it is the soil is a living, breathing organism, and there's so much we don't know. So, one of my big goals in this whole thing is, can we stop soil loss? Adam, you referred to erosion. For me, erosion happens in the wintertime. Like right now, we're snow covered, but when it melts in the rain that might be coming in the next 2 days, that's when we lose our clay soil because it's fragile and fine and it goes into solution. And can I stop that soil loss? And can we, as a larger industry, stop soil loss? That's a huge thing.
Yeah, I think
I shouldn't get on the soapbox. I'll stop.
The soil health classroom, I think we're all still in kindergarten, man.
Oh, absolutely, or younger.
Yeah, we have so much to learn. And that's what makes it so exciting, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a really great point to even just as we're coming to the close of this webinar, Andy, to wrap it up is like, we're all learning, we're all on this journey together. The Ontario Soil Network makes a really great point to jump off from, and some really great, amazing mentors and mentees to work with. And I think overall we've talked about know the why and the termination plan. Overall, keep trying and try again and try again. There will be train wrecks, but keep persevering because something will work. And then overall, the willingness to share. You've all shared some oops moments, some challenging moments, some success moments, and I really just appreciate the openness and the willingness to be honest and share within this group, and then to the group at large who's going to be watching this webinar later on. So thank you to all three of you for being a part of this.
Thanks for organizing that. That was great.
Yeah.
And to Paige too for helping facilitate this talk. That was
Paige.
so appreciated. Overall, as we're just wrapping up, there are CCA CEUs that have been applied for this webinar. So if you are watching this and would like to apply for that, please get in touch with me. And overall, I will just say another huge big thank you to all 4 of you for joining us today.
Welcome.